Hey everyone, welcome to day one of summer school. My name is Mr. Hagstrom and I'll be your teacher this term. Our first unit that we're going to cover is going to be matter and all of the different categories that we can put it in and all of the changes that matter can go through. So the first two categories we're going to cover are going to be elements and compounds. So if something is an element, one of the ways that you can tell is just by the number of capital letters it has in the name. So when you look at the periodic table, every box represents a different element, and every box is only going to have one capital letter. So when you see something like Cu or Ni, so Cu would be copper, that's its own element. You see Ni, that's nickel, that's also its own element. C by itself, that's carbon, and then O2, the stuff we breathe in, that's oxygen. So those would be examples of elements. So the other category we can have is called compounds. So if something is a compound, that just means it's made up of more than one element. So one example of that would be H2O. So H2, so the H is hydrogen, the O is oxygen. So water is made up of two different elements, hydrogen and oxygen. CO2, that's carbon dioxide, the stuff we breathe out, that's made of carbon and oxygen. So because there's two capital letters there, there's two different elements, that's going to be a compound. So NaCl, Na is sodium, Cl is chlorine. So NaCl is going to be sodium chloride. That's a compound because it has two capital letters. And the common name for that would just be table salt. So where this gets a little more complicated is when we take a bunch of compounds and elements and put them in a volume together. So the air that is all around you in the room or outside, wherever you happen to be, is what we call a mixture because you have different elements, you have different compounds all occupying the same space. So the air around you is made up of a couple main things, but one of them most obviously is oxygen. So oxygen is an example of an element. Nitrogen, which actually makes up most of the air, is just made of nitrogen, so that's also an element. Argon, that's also an element, and you have two compounds here. So carbon dioxide is made of carbon and oxygen, so the little gray dot here under carbon dioxide, that would be the carbon, and those red dots would be oxygen. And if you look down at water, water is made up of two different elements, as we talked about earlier. So H2, those little two white pieces, those would be the hydrogens, and then the big red dot in the middle, that would be oxygen. So to break this down even further, we can separate mixtures into two different categories. So everything that you see on the left here would be an example of a homogeneous mixture. Everything over here on the right is what we would call heterogeneous. So what the homogeneous mixtures all have in common is just the way that they look. So if you look at the orange juice, the coffee, Jello, or fruit punch, they look the same color all the way through. Orange juice is made up of a bunch of different things, as is Hawaiian punch, but you can't see all of the different components to it. It just looks like one uniform mixture. If you look over at the heterogeneous mixtures, what you'll notice is different is you can see all of the different things it's made of. So trail mix is made up of all sorts of things, cashews, M&Ms, and raisins, and you can see all of those components distinctly. Down in the bottom right, if you mix oil and water, the oil and the water don't mix evenly, so you can actually see where the oil is and where the water is, which makes it heterogeneous. So same thing with salad dressing right there if you let it sit out too long.